Hello, I'm Jude. I work for Magura USA and Magura Direct, which represents Magura, Uvex, and Vaude. And today we're going to show off our new MT8. It's brand new and hitting the market next month, in fact. And there's a few features that are different than our old Martas and Louises, and really simple and easy to bleed. But don't tell my boss, would you? I want to keep my job. So you have the basic setup that we always do with brake, caliper, and arrangement. And Magura always suggests that we remove the caliper. Some people may oppose that, but it's quick and easy. We don't deal with shims anymore. There's no reason to avoid taking the caliper off, and there's many reasons why you want to remove the caliper. You want to be able to manipulate the fluid itself when you're attaching and detaching the bleed port or the bleed nipple right here. And you can easily do that by controlling the height of the caliper. The higher the caliper, the fluid will recede. The lower the caliper, the fluid will try to make its way out the port. So many other reasons too. We want to have a high point when we're bleeding this brake. If you bleed it like this, your high points will be here, and you're not guaranteed to move the air out of the system. So we'll remove the caliper, remove the brake pads, and the new MT8 uses a T25 for everything. We use T25 for the caliper bolts, the bracket bolts, and the rotor bolts. On the MT8 we have a new aluminum pin, along with all of our hardware for the MT8 is all aluminum. We save 20 grams over the steel steel comparative that we still use, steel rotor bolts, steel alloy bolts, etc. But now we're at aluminum, all T25. We always replace the pads with our transportation device. It goes between the pads typically. This is 10 millimeters wide. It represents the missing pads, including back plates, and it perfectly allows the right amount of fluid to be added to the system and not too much or too little. Therefore, when the pads are completely worn out and the metal is touching the rotors, you still have fluid in the system that does not drop too low and suck in air. Our syringe has an M6 threaded bleed nipple. We've always used that. It replaces a regular automotive style bleed nipple which flows fluid outward. This way we can push fluid in through the system without risking injecting air. I have a 3 millimeter plug. You see, if I remove that, the fluid's not going to rush out anywhere. If I hold it lower, the fluid comes up. If I hold it higher, the fluid drops. It does not want to come out. See, it's dropping slowly. Go lower, comes up. So you just want to be able to control that. So when you're through with your bleed and you put the plug in, you're not just trapping in your air now, you want to displace fluid. And snug it. Now I can push and pull here aggressively without any risk of pushing in a little air in my bleeding process. You can let that hang now. It's a positive engagement and there's no risk of the syringe falling off. Now I'll work my way up to the master cylinder. Again, I talked about T25s. Our new MT8 uses only T25, and we use aluminum again hardware. I want to loosen my master enough to rotate it up about 45 degrees with the new MT8. We do no longer have a reservoir cap that you can take off and work in and out of. We have a bleed port, and I just need to remove the T25 plug. Which has a little O-ring on it. You see that the fluid's not going to go anywhere. And now I use my Pro Bleeder, which we've had for a long time. Typically this would attach to the master, but you remove this piece. Do away with your clamp and simply insert the nipple into the port. You can also use just a syringe without the plunger and shove the nipple in there. Now the process and the procedure for bleeding our brakes, or really anybody's brakes, is to use both pushing the fluid and pulling the fluid. When you push the fluid, you'll notice your fluid starts coming out the master, pushing out air. Anything might be in the system, and as it runs down into the Pro Bleeder's catch can, you can see the tube goes into the fluid. So not only does it catch the fluid, but now after you've pushed your fluid through your whole syringe load through the system, now I can draw the fluid back out, creating vacuum in the system. And vacuum in the system, now that I'm pulling and filling up the syringe here, I'm pulling right here, and it's drawing from my source. It's creating X amount of vacuum, whatever that may be, elongating the tiny trapped little wedged air in there, pulling it into the flow of the fluid. I like to use the example of a river with its eddies. A river can flow at a certain miles per hour, and you can hang out in a kayak right in a turbulent area and just sit there. It's the same thing inside this system. Little turbulent areas which will cause fluid to just tumble instead of push or pull the bubbles and the airs out of the system. So my procedure is basically 4 strokes. Push one full load of fluid through the system up into the Pro Bleeder, and then pull it back into the system, back into the syringe, creating a certain amount of vacuum and assuring that any trapped or lodged air will get pulled into the stream and exit the system. This is the problem that mechanics have, is if they bleed and bleed and bleed and bleed and still not happy with the results, possibly they're not creating vacuum. And it's common, it's really the procedure for automotive industry is vacuum. It's nothing new. So you can see I've just basically a 4-stroke system. Push the fluid out, pull it in, push it out, and pull it in, and you're done. As I am, basically. I'm just being a little bit more thorough. A lot of times I'll use a little rubber band just to hold that, because as you're pushing and pulling, it's slightly moving the pistons, and that would want to fall out. But I'm through. I've pushed 2 strokes in and pulled 2 strokes out. I'll leave my syringe here for the moment. I still have my plug here. I can go back up here now with the Pro Bleeder. It's very clean and easy. As I pull that out, the fluid flows into the catch can and there's no mess. You can just let that hang. Okay. And so if you don't have the fancy Pro Bleeder, which is a little pricey, you can use a basic syringe of ours, and the nipple itself will fit into the port of the MT8 without any problem whatsoever. So now you can push and pull and use this as an extended reservoir and watch your fluid rise, and then when you vacuum, you pull it back down and rise and vacuum. So it's really, you have a few options. We like to use the Pro Bleeder. It's a little cleaner, and it pulls from a source of fluid which can increase the vacuum. So you have several options. My plug goes back in, but before I plug it, I want to give it just the slightest amount of fluid to push and to make sure that I'm displacing fluid and not letting a little bit of air get trapped into this. That is 1 Newton meter. Torque spec, which is printed on the master.
Probably right here's going to be a great
I'm through with the master. I'll tighten that up after I finish pulling off my caliper. Now you can see, again, I can control my flow of my fluid and how much I lose, which won't be much. I'm still messy. You see the fluid doesn't shoot out. I just keep my finger on there as I replace the plug. And again, I talked about this step. You want to displace fluid.
Sure.
So you're assuring yourself not to pump in air. Clean up. Of course, it's messy. It's oil. Tends to want to run everywhere. You got to be as clean as possible because dust will collect, and you don't want to confuse that as a leaking caliper or master. So I try to be as clean as possible. It's still hard to do. I want to point out a pivoting banjo. That's another T25. You can adjust this according to chain stay, seat stay, or larger rotor usage. It's easy to adapt. Our new pads, which are universal for all the models, MT8, 6, 4, and 2. Same pads, 2 different compounds. Top loading pads. You notice the magnets pull them back to the side, so they're already fairly secure. Then your pin assures that your pads go nowhere during abuse. On the T25, a lot of surface area where you will less likely to strip. Whoops. Let's put that in the right way. How about? Sorry. And then I think I spoke about pulling the caliper off. It just doesn't take much effort to put it all back together. I'm using steel bolts today with a 5mm head, but the new MT8 calipers come with a T25 alloy caliper bolts. Pull the brake. Feels good, and I'll torque the caliper bolts to 6 Newton meters. Finish it off.